Well, hello and welcome back to another episode of BiblioFiles. It's a three welcome day. Rapid fire round, one from each of you. Since we have, over the course of this whole season of talking about movies, not spent a lot of time on animated films. What is your favorite animated movie? Missy?
The Incredibles.
Megan?
I wasn't ready.
Well, that's part of rapid fire. That's what rapid fire is all about.
I'm not about rapid fire. Anyone who knows me knows I'm very methodical. I take a long time.
Stop buying time.
Peter Pan.
Dad?
Either Prince of Egypt or Robin Hood with the Foxes.
I love those choices.
Great options.
Erase my choice.
Emily?
The Emperor's New Groove.
The Emperor's New
I cannot
Groove.
possibly
Poison
follow
meant for
any of
Cusco.
that.
Cusco's
That
poison.
checks out.
Cusco's
My
poison.
favorite,
checks out.
animated movie is The Wind in the Willows, circa 1995. I think it's the 1995, the
With,
watercolor version.
Lynn
The one with
Redgrave.
beautiful
Yes.
Vanessa
music.
Redgrave,
Vanessa
right?
Redgrave.
Vanessa Redgrave.
Reading the introduction. I think it's a shame. In retrospect, I mean, I'm the guy who wrote the plan for this season, so it's kind of on me. But it's a shame that we haven't taken up animated movies. I think not to
I think
spend the
so,
whole
too.
episode talking about it now, but what a fabulous art form, and what a deep and wide one in recent years.
I agree.
That would be fun. At the
But
end of
the
a day
same
like that, we would
conversation
say, ooda lolly.
Oodle lolly.
Golly,
exactly
I think it's
what
the
we
same
would
conversation
say.
as picture books versus novels.
Yeah.
Oh. Well, welcome back, you guys. It's good to see your faces as per the usual. Today we have a great topic on the table in front of us, which is the recent film adaptation of the Middle English poem Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And Emily's on the hot seat, although I think all of us have seen the film, but this was Emily's idea for an episode. And she has a couple of interesting things to say about it. By way of preface, what I'll say is that the topic for our episode is the question of responsive art. And not to steal the punch from Emily's comments, but I think she sees the movie through this particular vein, and it's going to be a great discussion. So Emily, what's your takeaway? How would you open the discussion on this particular film?
Well, I am not necessarily settled entirely in my opinion, so it will be
That
fun
makes for the
to
best conversation.
toss it around in conversation. But I guess my opening salvo will just be only a studio as weird as A24 could have taken up adapting a Middle English poem.
Agreed. Emily, what else have they done? Give us a quick précis.
I can't give you titles, but like they're starting to become really prolific. Every time I go to the theater, there's a new trailer from A24, and the one that will forever be stuck
It's true.
in my scarred little memory is a trailer for a film about a family, a Scandinavian family.
It's called Lamb.
Is that what it was
Yes,
called?
it's the name of the
Well, it appears that in the movie, and by the way, in the background is a Beach Boys, very upbeat Beach Boys soundtrack. The family, the little husband and wife discover that their child, or no, they have a lamb farm, right?
Mhm.
And one of the
There's a
lambs,
lambing,
there's a lambing,
as the Scots would
and
say.
it's half lamb, half human.
What?
And it has little child legs
Yeah.
and a lamb head, and it appears as though it's supposed to be cute.
I
That
don't know.
it's like a weird mixture
What
of
in the
horror.
world?
Well, okay, so like Sir Gawain, right? It's like horror,
Absurdist.
yeah, thinky horror, and like
Thinky horror.
Well,
Is it
yeah, I
like
mean, it
that
seems
movie
like-
Ghost that we saw?
Well, that is
together?
the director. So David Lowery
Casey
is
Affleck?
the guy who directed Sir Gawain and the
Oh.
Green Knight.
Okay.
And he also directed this film I watched with Mom called Ghost. I think it was just you and I.
No, I was
watched
there.
It.
Were you there?
I
with
was
us?
also there. Yes, it was very strange
The guy walks
Yes.
around with a sheet over his head.
because he's dead.
But that's how
Yeah.
they portrayed it, as a guy walking around with a sheet over his head. It was
He
really
literally
interesting.
stands in the corner of room silently with the sheet over him.
You
and
save
he's
money on
supposed to be the
CG
ghost.
that way.
Right.
Good point. Really
It's a
good
little bit
point.
like,
I
in
think it
your
was a
backyard
good-
putting on a movie.
Like looking back, I think Ghost is actually a good film, but
I think it
is
was too.
strange.
Well, it
Just
sounds
like Sir
fr-
Gawain and the Green Knight.
just watching the
Yes.
trailer for Lamb, it looked to me like it was a surrealistic personification device to talk about either postpartum depression or some sort of maternal obsession.
Yeah, like
It looked like that was the subject of the movie.
or maybe some kind of like work-life imbalance. I don't know. But anyway,
But
that's A24. That's
Right.
not David Lowery, the director, but A24 is coming out with a lot of
Some weird
contemplative
stuff.
horror flicks, and they are the ones who did Sir Gawain and the Green Knight.
So is that
Okay,
what you
that's
would
helpful
say?
context.
Is that what you would
Yeah.
say about Gawain and the Green Knight, the story? I mean, how would you categorize it in terms of genre? We know it's a Middle English poem, but it's a weird story.
You're talking about the text now, not the
Yes,
movie.
I'm talking about
Oh,
the
okay.
text. Yeah.
I think that we are going to get a lot of interesting conversation about this episode because I think that it is one of the most misread poems that I know of. And I think that it is great. I do love it, but I think that on the surface level, people lump it in obviously with chivalric romance.
Right.
Mhm.
In fact, in the movie, it says this is the chivalric romance story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and it's Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
And you kind of want to transfer in a lot of thematic content from that tradition
Of
into
course.
the poem,
Yeah, super tempting.
and you should. That is the intention of it. But just because it imports all of that thematic heft doesn't mean it's saying the same thing as the chivalric tradition.
Right, which
So
makes
it
sense
belongs-
actually, given the
I'm sorry.
context of art in general. Sorry, Mama. Given the context of art in general, few works survive that aren't at least a little bit countercultural. Right. I mean, whether it's a full-scale indictment or just an observation, generally a great work of art looks around at the culture and says, I have questions about this.
I have
That's interesting.
never thought about that before. I have never thought about the idea that a work of art that has survived the centuries probably has that power because in some way it was countercultural. And so I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a compelling idea. And so when we look back on a historical work of art, we're looking at a critique of its day and age, maybe as often as not.
Are you
Maybe
suggesting
so.
that maybe that's going on in the choice of genre with this particular author?
Maybe. I mean, and Emily, I'll let you answer that question, but my impression of the idea is that or of what Emily's trying to say rather is that the fact that it's set in an era of chivalry in the context of the chivalric code doesn't necessarily mean it is issuing like a clarion call the chivalric code as its thematic material.
I see.
I would say that about the poem, certainly.
Yeah,
Right.
I think so too.
Right.
But it is participating in the Arthurian legend cycle, right?
Right. But the question is how?
And it is full of, I mean, to kind of go back to the conversation of it being a film adaptation, the poem, the text is full of a lot of magical, supernatural elements and the fantastical for sure, which definitely issues a challenge for someone who would want to translate it to film. I mean,
No kidding.
you run the danger of it being, I don't know, too trite, like
yeah.
like almost a children's story because it's fantastical, or just plain not working as a story because it's too strange.
Yeah.
just
And
weird.
you can, I mean, it's easy to gloss over some of the weirdness when you're reading the poem, more difficult when he puts it on the screen
Right.
in the shape of a 2.5 mile tall giant, for example.
Yeah, yeah. That's exactly what I was thinking about when you said that.
He
Just a little weird.
draws some of the surrealist elements to the surface, I think you could say.
Well, and the poem itself leaves a lot of room. They basically took a story that probably could have been told in half an hour to an hour and extended it, because there is one section in the middle of the poem where it says Gawain goes out exploring, looking for the chapel, and had many adventures along the way.
Maybe it would be helpful, Emily, for some of our listeners who may or may not have read a lot of Middle English poetry, to give them just a quick summary of the plot.
Sure. So it takes place in Arthur's court. Arthur is king. And one of the differences of the film that is true of the text, it's not true of the film, but in the text, Arthur is a young king who is making merry at Christmas at his court. And he asks his knights for a feat of strength or a story of some kind. He wants someone to do something amazing.
A Christmas
Entertain
game.
him. Yeah.
Do something amazing, I guess.
I don't know, something amazing.
I
guess.
guess.
The Incredibles. It keeps coming back to me.
So right when he asks that, a giant green knight walks in the room on horseback, and he has in one hand a giant axe and in the other hand a holly branch, and he issues a challenge to the court and says, take this branch from me and strike at me, and I will return for you blow for blow in a game. And he's very clear it's a game. In the Middle English, when he says take this branch from me, it's unclear whether he's talking about the axe or the holly branch.
Right.
So there's kind of a choice.
The same word could mean either.
apply
It's
to both. Yeah.
ambiguous.
Oh,
Sweet.
interesting.
Yeah.
So Arthur is the one who initially wants to accept the challenge, but his knights tell him, no, you have too much responsibility. You can't do that. And so Gawain steps up and he decides that he'll be the one to accept the challenge.
His nephew, Arthur's nephew.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And he strikes off the head of the knight. He just goes for it and decides that this is his time.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the knight picks up his head, not dead, and says, I'll see you in a year, and goes away. And so a year passes, and Gawain, who has become a hero of the court, is equipped with a whole bunch of things, including lots of like religious symbolism. He's Mary is on the inside of his shield, and he has the 5 points which represent the 5 wounds of Christ on him. And so he is kind of made into the perfect knight errant and sent off to go find the Green Chapel and get whatever he had coming to him after the game a year later. And on the way, after many adventures, which we don't know anything about, he comes to a castle owned by a lord named Bertilac. And he welcomes him in. He's tired from his long journey, and he gives him shelter and says, you're so close to where the chapel is, so come rest with me, and then we'll send you on your way.
Have Christmas with us.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Take a
Gawain
load off.
stays there. And Bertilac challenges him to another game and says, for the next 3 nights, I'm going to go hunting. And while I'm gone, you stay here, you rest up and get your strength. But I'm going to hunt.
No, he's more specific.
Hold on, I'm going to get there.
Yeah. Wait
He
for
says,
it.
I'm going to hunt. And whatever I get, I will give to you. And whatever you get while you're in the castle, you give to me. Well, it turns out that Bertilac has a really hot wife who is also in the castle, and she will not let Gawain go. She pursues him very hotly.
Very
and-
hotly. It's a real
Very hotly.
Joseph
In
and
steamy
Potiphar
fashion.
situation.
Yeah.
Yep, she just basically will
biblical
not let the
reference, I got
issue
you.
go, and he resists. He tries to be. He's basically what happens is he's stuck in a situation where he has to choose between his code of chivalry, where according to the code of chivalry, you serve your lady and you do
And the
whatever
lady
she
is
asks.
never wrong.
Well, you don't
The lady
embarrass
is
her.
never wrong,
right?
and you never embarrass her. But he's also a good Christian knight, and so he's also under the code of moral conduct, and so he shouldn't be anywhere near Bertilac's wife. So he successfully keeps her away for 2 nights. But on the 3rd night, he does end up taking a green belt from her. He doesn't do anything else with her. She just gives him a gift and says, if you wear this green belt, you will be safe from whatever is coming. And so,
it's just too tempting.
Yep, he takes it.
Right.
And of course, according to the rules of the game, he's supposed to give that back to Bertilac, and he doesn't. He keeps it for himself. And that is that. And he's sent on his way to meet the Green Knight. And in the story, in the poem, he does end up meeting the Green Knight, wearing the belt, and the Green Giant hacks away at him 3 times. And the first 2 times he flinches. And the 3rd time he gets him a little bit and says, well, that's a blow for blow, 1 for each strike. It turns
But he
out
just nicks him.
He just nicks him. He doesn't take
Right.
off
Doesn't
his
cut
head.
his head off.
And he says, basically, you lied to me. It turns out that the Green Knight is actually Bertilac in a strange reveal. And
Magic is afoot.
he says, according to the rules of the game, each nick or each blow was for each of the three exchanges at the castle, but you lied to me and you didn't give me the belt. And so that last nick was for a punishment for that. And Gawain is so embarrassed and so sorry, and he's mortified at himself. And he's invited to continue to spend Christmas with Bertilac and his wife, but refuses in shame, and keeps the green belt so that it will be a sign of his shame forever and ever to all generations. And he goes back home and tells everyone what happened and says, I'm going to wear this belt forever because everyone needs to know that I am not a true knight and I've completely failed the code. And this will be a sign of my shame. And basically everyone laughs at him, and they all decide to wear the green belt themselves to show that they also identify with Gawain.
It's a show of solidarity.
Right.
Yeah,
It's kind of
you can-
beautiful.
Yep, you can either read it as a mockery, but I prefer the reading of it being them saying, none of us are perfect at this chivalry thing, and so we're all going to wear it as a sign of our brotherhood.
And
Emily,
it's
well
interesting
done.
that you could kind of call it both things at once, because they are chiding him in the story, but it's not scornfully. It looks like it's more gentle mockery to try to get him to laugh at himself and
Well,
Yeah.
not take his failure too seriously, because
he
he's
certainly
human.
doesn't have humility, even when he
Right.
comes back wearing his shame. Right.
Right. Well, Emily, well done. That was
That was awesome.
That's a lot of story to summarize.
Thank you.
I have a question.
I wondered why you had me do that whole thing.
Well,
It's been a
because-
long time since I read that story, and there was an element that I wonder if I'm misremembering, and it's about how the Green Knight and Bertilac came to be the same person. He was enchanted, right?
Why was he
whom?
not green? Why couldn't we tell?
So
Morgana Le
I
Fay.
did, yes, by Morgan Le
Morgana.
Fay, who is Arthur's sister, but
Evil
not
sister.
as in the film, not his mother. His
Okay.
mother is something else that is like Morgans or something like that. It sounds like it's very similar.
It's very confusing.
So not the same
So
person as
Morgan
his
Le
legend.
mother.
Fay is his aunt, and she is an enemy to Arthur, and she enchanted the Green Knight and had him come to visit Arthur's court to test, basically as a test to the court. And this is significant in the poem because basically Arthur fails the test because
Mhm.
we can assume that Gawain learned his impetuosity from his king.
From Arthur, right?
I see. Interesting.
Okay, so the poem puts a lot of stress on this tension that you mentioned, Emily, between the demands of the chivalric code and the demands of Christian morality, right? Being a Christian knight. And there are a handful of ways to read the end of the poem, but none of them really truly erase that tension.
Mhm.
The poem seems to say you kind of can't do both of those things.
You can
Right.
either be Christian or chivalric, you mean?
Yeah.
Well,
That's really
and
interesting.
you're gonna fail at both, essentially. A
Well,
code
yeah.
of conduct is a great thing, but you
It
are
only
not-
lives to
you
be
can't
broken.
live up to it.
Right. You are not a code
Isn't
of
that
conduct.
just
You're
the
a
truth
person.
of any law?
Okay,
Mm.
so with that as a preface, let's jump into the details of the film itself, because we are talking about film adaptations here. And just because this is an obscure story, I thought it was good to have a little précis of the novel in question or the poem.
Yeah,
in question.
absolutely.
Mhm.
But Emily, what about this film? And all the rest of you too. You guys have seen this, right?
Well,
Mhm.
and
No.
please
Sorry,
feel free
I'm
to
gonna
jump
out
in.
myself. I have not.
Well, Megan, you should totally see it. It's the
Yeah, I'm looking
great-
forward to it.
The fantastic Dev Patel, who is
He's great. He's
marvelous.
riveting.
Oh,
Yeah.
He's
so good.
been wonderful in everything I've seen him in, and he plays the Green Knight. And
Gawain.
No, he plays
Gawain.
I'm
Gawain.
sorry,
He's
Gawain. Of course,
I was like, wow, he plays a giant. Let's
wrong.
go.
No,
Wrong. No, Emily, wrong.
Yes, so he's great. Kind of when this movie came out, first of all, my first thought was, wow, they're really gonna do that. That's an interesting
Yeah.
choice. And then I was really excited. It looked like they were going to do a good job, and we didn't see it for a while. And all the chatter online kind of fell into two camps. The secular camp, which said that was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. It didn't have a plot and we don't really understand it.
Hmm.
And then there was the Christian side, which said, how dare you turn Gawain into a dissolute? Because he is supposed to be a knight. He's supposed to be virtuous. And isn't that what the story is all about?
Oh,
Ooh, fun.
It turns out that in the film, they made a choice to have
Yes.
Gawain be kind of a layabout. He spends his time in a whorehouse. He's drunk all the time, and he is not the model of a good Christian knight.
In the
from
movie,
the beginning.
it seems like in the movie, he's characterized as somebody who's not yet quite come of age, almost like a college frat boy who hasn't
that's-
quite gotten it together.
I agree. I think
Right?
that's true. Mm-hmm.
Doesn't he?
Yeah.
The first time we see him, isn't he late for something, having partied the night before and
For Christmas,
wakes up
yeah.
with a hangover and
He's late.
Yeah.
He's
rushes
late
to
for,
class?
He's late for the encounter.
Oh,
with the
that's
Green
right.
Knight.
He's late for the thing. That's
Yeah,
right.
It's
That's right.
Christmas morning, and he's late to mass, late to Arthur's court on Christmas morning because he's been
Partying it
away
up.
through the previous evening.
Right.
So
Well,
the
and in the
other-
movie, the mom is kind of responsible for the enchantment of the night. And it almost looks like, I mean, I understood it as I was watching the film as something that she has contrived in order to draw her son to some sort of maturity.
Right. Yes. And the king, who I want to talk about in a second, but Arthur kind of doubles down on this principle. And even before the night arrives, when he asks for a show, a spectacular show, like he does in the poem, he's speaking particularly to Gawain, who he has invited to sit by his side. And he says, tell me a story, make it a game. I'd love to hear about you. I don't know anything about you. And he says, make this a game so that I can get to know you.
Right.
So the idea is that whatever Gawain's about to do, this is going to reveal something about his character. And they made the interesting choice in the film of having Arthur not be young and impetuous, but being basically at his deathbed.
Yep.
He's quite old, and it's clear that he's going to die, and he doesn't have an heir. And so the question
It's
is,
important that
Gawain
he
is
come of
next of
age.
kin. Is he going to make a good king?
Hmm.
And the only thing that I can think of that in their decision for doing this is that it sets up a nice contrast between the code of chivalry and youth, that Arthur in his age kind of represents a staid cultural idea that's passing away. And the question is what the next generation is going to do about that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only reason I can think of to have him be old like that.
Right. I can see
I like
that.
that.
Yeah, and maybe in that context, it tends towards exonerating the culture surrounding Gawain for his attitudes and proclivities.
Well, right. It's kind of shorthand to us because we are watching it. We're not reading the poem. It's a new age that the story is being told in, and its chivalry maybe isn't as big of a deal as it was then. And so it tells us that this is something that was important. This is a cultural standard, and Gawain is failing to meet it, and that is significant.
Interesting.
I like that.
Politically speaking, at
So
least.
are we
So-
supposed to stand with Gawain then as the readers or the viewers as people who've forgotten the chivalric code? Is that what the movie's trying to do?
Well, that's such a good question. I have so many mixed feelings about this because on the one hand, Gawain is not supposed to be perfect. That's kind of the point, like we talked about
Right.
with the poem. And so it highlights the fact that he needs to prove himself in some way. And we see why he needs to prove himself in some way, because he doesn't have a great reputation in the court. And then there's the interesting little relationship he has with his girlfriend at the at the whorehouse.
The whorehouse.
Right,
Yeah.
But he has she's steady. He sees her continually.
He
They
clearly
have
loves her.
something, right? They have
she's
a
a
stable
loyal whore.
relationship. And on his way, after he's already chopped off the head of the knight, and he's on his way a year later to go fulfill his oath, she says to him, why do you have to go and be great? Why do you have to fulfill this oath? And he basically says, honor, right? I have to be honorable, which is very true to the poem. And she says, well, why do you have to be great when you could just be good? And so there's a question of what goodness is. And I'm not, even though I really like this film and I think it does a really good job of bringing to the surface a lot of the important themes of the story, I question what it says about goodness, actually.
Mm.
Okay.
Can we?
I love that.
Wait, can I jump in for a second and ask you to define what you think they mean by that? The difference between greatness and goodness. Because do you see those as like a good, better,
Like a
best type
continuum,
thing,
right?
like a superlative form of goodness is being great, or do you read to be great is to be famous,
And to be good is to be
and
moral.
to be good is to be moral?
I lean to the latter of
Mhm.
those.
It
from
sounded
watching
like
the
it
movie
from your
myself.
interpretation. Yeah.
She's not saying why be a 3 when you could be a 2.
Mm-mm.
She's saying why be famous when you could be
Yes.
upstanding.
Okay,
Right.
good.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's really true. So to let's back out a little bit. And Emily, I love where you took that with the question of, okay, what are they talking about when they say goodness here? But let's talk about the ways that it's a good or bad film adaptation. You talked about, or we titled the episode Responsive Art. And this is kind of a new category that we haven't gone over yet, right? We've talked about some really good film adaptations. We've talked about some poor ones. We're going to talk about an even poorer one in a minute, in a future episode. But what is it about this? Where does this one lie? It seems like it's between those things. It's not a straight ahead retelling. I mean, already the surface level differences, Arthur being an old king, Gawain being a dissolute instead of an already famous, a knight that's already famous for his purity. Even those changes make it not a straight ahead retelling of the story. So is something about it similar to the spirit of the poem?
Yes. I've been going around and around in my head about this. And what I've come to at the moment is I think that it understands the poem pretty well. But instead of telling us that Christianity is the answer, and I laugh at this because people misread this poem all the time and miss the fact that this is a story about repentance and community in sin. But it does kind of come down firmly on that as the answer in the poem.
Yeah.
But in the movie, I think they ask a question and say, this is there an answer to Gawain's problem? And they leave us hanging, right? They don't show us the ending. They end the film with Gawain in front of the Green Knight at the Green Chapel, and he actually chooses to take off the green belt.
Yep.
Which on the one hand seems to me like it flirts with going back in the direction of the misreading, that he has chosen to
he
be
finally
virtuous,
makes the right choice.
and therefore when the Green Knight says well done, he's saying well done for being a good and virtuous knight. And so everyone who's concerned about Gawain and his
Morality.
virtue, well, he actually is.
Read the movie better. All y'all misreaders got exactly what you wanted.
Well, I don't know. It's difficult, but
maybe it's repentance instead.
well, that's true on the one hand. On the other hand, I think that they show by all the strange directions that the movie goes in the other parts of it, I think that they tell the Gawain story over and over again through echoes of it in other ways.
Yeah.
So that by the time we get to the end, it's put as a question. In particular, there's a scene, Gawain's just at the beginning of his journey. He's given the green belt at the beginning of the story in this one, which didn't happen in the poem. His mother gives it to him and tells him that it will protect his head. She basically just comes out and says it, and he wears it, and he's beset by robbers on the way, and they steal it from him,
along with the axe.
And so he and they lead him out into the middle of the forest. This, by the way, is not in the poem. This is all the director's creation.
But I'll break in before you narrate the scene. This is evidence to me from an artistic standpoint that he does understand the poem.
I think so.
Yeah.
Because this is one of the most stunning visual treats of the whole film.
Well, and it's essentially an inversion of the Gawain story, because the kid, the robber, when Gawain says, "Where am I?" he says, "You're in the Green Chapel. This is it." And he smashes the shield that has the portrait of Mary and Christ, and they go away. And Gawain is left there lying without the green belt. It's taken
Tied
away
up.
from him. He's found out, right, for having it, essentially, kind of like he is in the poem. And he lays there, and there's a shot that pans around. And when it comes back to him, he's dead. He's been left. We see a vision of what would happen if he was just abandoned.
He's
there.
a skeleton, right?
He's a skeleton, yeah.
Yeah, it's super slow panning in a circle around the forest, and seasons change and time passes. And when you finally get back to him, he's a moldering corpse.
And then that he changes it, and we see that this has just been like an imagining. He is alive, and he does find a way to escape. But that to me is one of the answers, right? Later, Gawain is going to be afraid to face the Green Knight, and he says, "Is this all there is?" And the Green Knight says, "What else should there be?" So there's this. He faces death for the sake of honor and virtue, and there's a chance that that's it. That's the end, and that the Green Chapel really is just a place of death.
And there's two versions of the ending, right? And this is another part that's really controversial. Instead of having the scene in the chapel where Bertilac gives him a nick instead of cutting off his head and sends him home, instead of having that whole last scene with Arthur and his court and the girdle being accepted as a symbol of brotherhood and all of that, the filmmaker instead gives us a version of the story where Gawain runs away, where he's a coward. And he goes back to Arthur's kingdom and takes Arthur's throne. And you see a fast forward of the rest of his life, wherein he is the monarch and he puts away his prostitute bride to be and takes
after she bears his child.
Yeah, after she bears his child, puts away his family, takes an advantageous marriage from another culture, turns his kingdom into an empire. The empire eventually crumbles and falls, and he dies an old man with nothing.
It's
And no
basically,
head.
it looked like an outworking of the consequences of him making the wrong choice.
Yeah, very moralistic reading there.
Right,
That's-
exactly. If you are a coward, if you don't devote yourself to honor, this is the life you will have.
Well,
Right.
and in the dream vision of his future life, when he is circled, his kingdom is under attack, right? He's become king, his kingdom is under attack, and he's at the end of his rope. And so he takes off the green belt. He's been wearing it his
Right.
whole life as a safety belt, essentially. And he does take it off, and his head falls off.
Immediately.
So the idea is he died, or he'd already died.
Yeah.
At the
By
point that he
by
running away.
by rejecting
Right,
his honor,
right,
by
right.
cheating. I cheated.
That
was
was
as good
living
as
death.
dead.
The
And
whole
that
thing
was
was
as good as
living
dead.
death.
Living death. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
So then we zoom back to the present from that foreshadowing, and he takes the girdle off and says, okay, I'm ready. And then we get this ambiguous ending.
Okay, but then, so the other weird story from his travels, and I don't even know if we're going to touch on the strange giants, but they're there. I will acknowledge. that
really
they're
wish you would.
strange
Trust me,
I
they're
naked
want to
huge.
giants.
understand the giants.
And
I
Did
have
you say
some
strange
ideas.
naked giants?
Strange,
Yes.
giant naked women.
All right. Well, this is so weird. I got to see it.
You do.
Sounds
Um,
like
So another
absurdism.
story, he's in the woods and he comes upon, the episode is called like he encounters Saint Winifred, and Saint Winifred is a Welsh saint who was
who has a well of some sort. I've read about it in poetry.
yeah, her story, which we don't get in the movie, but the background is that she had a suitor. Her father kind of arranged a marriage for her, but while she was being courted, she decided she wanted to be a nun, and so the suitor came in and cut off her head in his fury over the fact that she was going to reject him. So
Whoa.
there's head imagery again, and kind of in a martyrdom sense. And so in the movie, Gawain comes upon a place that is apparently Saint Winifred's house, and he sleeps because he hasn't had a soft bed to sleep in, and she wakes him up
As a spirit.
and says, I have a job for you. Will you dive to the bottom of this lake and get my head? I need my head. And so
Like you
very
do.
weird.
This is
The
the weirdest
scene
movie
itself, you
I've ever
guys,
not
as a-
seen.
for you people.
As a
A24.
cinephile, it is a spectacular scene. I mean, the visuals, the whole movie is beautiful,
It
visually
is.
speaking, stylistically a feat.
I
But
have to
this
say-
scene where he dives down into the water, it feels like a spiritual meditation on guilt
Yeah.
and the way in which he, as a stand-in for the code of chivalry, for the culture of knighthood, is bearing the guilt of his his sires, right? And she one of
Wow.
the lines that hangs over the scene is a knight should not do this thing, right? A knight shouldn't sleep in
yeah.
a woman's bed.
It was a knight that cut off her head
Right.
in the film.
And so he is as a Christian knight, he's now trying to expunge the evil of knighthood, kind of once and for
Wow.
all.
So a couple of things.
And I'm sorry. Baptism
Right.
imagery, anything? Right? I mean,
I was
also,
gonna say,
we're
death
diving
and
down into the bottom
resurrection,
of a
yeah.
well. I mean, it's Beowulf. It's pulling on Beowulf, diving down to
Right,
do
yeah.
battle with the monster. I mean, there's so many literary allusions that I have to believe this director knows what he's doing. He's conversant in the tradition. Okay, Emily. I'm
What
sorry,
is he
I cut you off.
saying with it?
Well, go,
Well,
Emily. Let's hear it.
Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
So in that scene, Winifred, he says, if I do this thing for you, what will you do for me? And she says, why would you ask me that? Why would you ever ask me that? And then he does it. And so this seeds the idea of exchange and deserving, and tit for tat, which is at the heart of the Gawain poem. And he's learned that he encounters situations over the course of the film where he is invited to do something, and his first response is to think of himself and what he would get in return, until the end of the film, when he stands before the Green Knight and he takes off the belt, and all the Green Knight does is smiles at him and tells him good job. And he says, off with your head. And he draws a line across his throat. And
Across his own throat. Bertilak does.
No, across Gawain's throat. He uses his finger to draw a line on Gawain's throat.
Okay.
Off with your head, he says.
I misremembered.
And then the film is over. And so all of the stuff about coming back home to Arthur's court and all that's gone. But, and it's also kind of ambiguous whether that's what's going to happen next. Like, was that it? Is that good enough? Is the knight satisfied? He kind of smiles. Maybe this is good, or maybe he means like, okay, now off with your head.
Or was it just the end of the game, and what he was saying, he was implying that
Tell the truth.
he was a head case, right? And now he's not anymore.
What I see is that we as the audience aren't given the tit for tat, right? We don't see what he's going to get out of doing the right thing. It's just over. And so there's a sense in which deserving, like, we're invited to think of deserving as not part of the equation.
Interesting.
That he's
Hadn't
given
thought of that.
grace instead of justice in some
Well,
way.
we don't know what he's given. That's what she's trying to say.
Yeah, it's not that he's given something else. Is that he's not getting a tit for tat. Right. It's been eliminated.
Well,
which
it's not
is true.
retributive, at least.
Yeah.
In either case, if the knight decides to strike off his head, he did the right thing, right? He took off the belt. He should be saved, and that would not be getting what he deserves. If he doesn't get his head struck off, well, he didn't do the right thing, right? He struck off the
In
knight's
no way
head.
then is he getting what he deserves.
By the terms of the game, he's supposed to get exactly what he gave to the knight, which is striking off his head. And so, true to the poem, he does not get what he deserves. He gets grace from the Green Knight. And so I think that the film meditates on the question of why we do things, and if we should do things for what we get out of them.
Interesting.
Or not.
That's a really nuanced reading. I like.
Yeah,
it.
I love that.
Makes me want to watch the film again. My impression of that final scene was slightly different, which is that something is coming. We don't get to know what it is. It isn't that the finger drawn across the neck is what he gets. It's that you don't get to know what he gets.
Well, and that's why I wanted to pay attention to that scene where where the robber says, this is the Green Chapel, right? This is it, death. That's the end. That's one of the options on the table. And I think that's the option our culture understands at the moment. And I don't know that our culture would understand what the Green Knight actually does offer.
Yeah, I think you might be right about that. And that's the extent to which this is in conversation with the original poem. It's not a perfect film adaptation, because we've already talked about that being standing alongside the author and delivering the author's point. I don't think that's what he's doing. But I do think he's saying, I see you. What about this? And it holds up, right? It stands as its own work of art from my perspective. What do you guys think of that?
Well, I don't know, because it sounds like, given Emily's tour of the movie that we've just had, that the the film is saying something along the lines of, you guys have misread the poem. That really, I mean, assuming that the general reading, the moralistic reading, don't be sure and tell the truth and be a knight of honor and give the belt back and all will be well. That's not really what the poem is all about. The poem is about not getting what you deserve. It's about some sort of grace.
Yeah, agreed.
And it sounds like in Emily's interpretation is that is what the poem, or that's what the film is saying. So in other words, the film is offering a better reading of the poem than maybe its audience has come to it with.
Well, and the other side of that, I mean, on the one hand, just not getting what you deserve could be because there's a gracious God. On the other hand, it could be because the universe is meaningless.
Right.
And so when Bertolac's wife, who is played by the same actress who plays his little girlfriend, tells him, she asks, why is the night green? Right. That's the first thing that an English teacher does when they teach this poem. What is the significance of the night being green? And she makes Gawain answer that question. And she instead ends up giving a long monologue on it. And she is very naturalistic in her description of what the greenness is. And she says, it creeps back. It's what's left when red is gone. Men love red, right? It's the color of blood. It's the color of lust. But when red is gone, green creeps back in. It's the color of life. That's the result of lust. She says, grass will fill in your footprints when you're gone. All you hold dear will succumb to it, your skin, your bones, and your virtue. So when everything is gone, green will still be there. And it's two-sided. On the one hand, that could be very hopeless, but it's still green, right? It represents life. And so the Christian reading of that is that death, like you have to
Is swallowed up in life, maybe.
right. So
wow. I gotta go watch this again, you guys.
No, I want to.
That makes me way
this.
more excited to watch it again, because I definitely took the nihilistic reading away from my
So
first
did
reading.
I. I thought her long monologue was a very depressing take on, no matter what you do, the vines and grasses will outlive you. And the visual elements of that scene showed basically the green grass and vines overtaking the works of man,
it's
right?
violent.
Tearing down the castle and filling in all the gaps. And the gist of it, sorry, go ahead, Emily.
No, go ahead.
The gist of it was your virtue is pointless and meaningless and temporary.
Yeah.
Right.
In the same way that it overtakes him in that scene in the woods you keep going back to when he's accosted and it leaves him dead, just a skeleton.
Which I think he puts that first. And I don't know, I just would like to believe that even if the director himself leans that direction, that it still ends with a question, which is maybe why he ends it abruptly. But there's a point, he ends up being accompanied by a little fox along the way. And in the last scene, the fox talks to him, and it's absolutely creepy. The fox has a very scary voice, and he stands in the poem. There's a servant who says, "Do not go to the Green Chapel. This is the last river that you cross to get there. Please don't go." But in the movie, it's the fox who's been following him the whole way, and he stands in front of him and says, "Don't do this thing. Don't continue on with your journey." He says, "The man that you're about to see is as wild as I am." And that's what you can and you will expect wildness from him. And on the one hand, that he could mean the very thing that we're talking about with the greenness creeping back and being there when you're gone, and it's careless of, it's like the red badge of courage, right? Nature will be there when you're gone. It has nothing,
it's careless of you,
care about you. On the other hand, it reminds me of Aslan, right? Like he's not a tame lion,
but he's good.
He's not safe. And we don't know what kind of a man the Green Knight ends up being.
That is very interesting, because the poem, in my view, if correctly read, ends on it's very hopeful.
Jovial,
in terms of maybe even jovial. Yeah. And that reading of the movie gives it a sort of a hopeful cast at the end as well. Though we don't know how it turns out, we sort of have an inkling that the line across the throat is jovial as well.
It could be.
There's a jest in it.
So why I'm playing the devil's advocate here, because I am pretty persuaded at this point, Emily. But to play devil's advocate, why then interject Gawain giving back the girdle?
Mm-hmm.
Because that is if what he wanted to say was, look how the goodness of growth and mortality and all things your footsteps will be filled in. If that's what he wants to say, and that's a hopeful thing, and that you don't get what you deserve, etc. Why does he drag the issue of deserving it right back in at the end and have that
idea.
be a decision, the thing that makes the Green Knight say, well done, good job, you did it, right? Why does he do that? Because it doesn't happen in the poem. So it seems unnecessary to add that unless you really wanted the topic of the conversation to be about doing it right or not doing it right.
Well, he does it though right after that long foreshadowing of what the consequences would be for him to choose the other path, right? And
Mhm.
so I wonder if the point is that virtue is its own reward, not that virtue buys you anything necessarily, just that it's a reward in and of itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that this might be the part where he's talking to a different culture,
to our own era.
And he establishes that Gawain isn't a good guy in other ways, right? And in ways that have offended people, as we talked about earlier. And so he doesn't, in the poem, the fact that Gawain keeps the belt is what establishes his sinfulness, essentially.
Yeah.
But the movie does that in other ways. And so that's,
His sinfulness is not subtle in the movie, and it is in the poem.
Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, at that point, maybe the director just thought it wasn't necessary to ram that point home again. But maybe what is necessary is, like Mom was saying, to establish the fact that virtue is, although imperfectly kept, valuable in itself.
I remember being surprised and relieved to find that long history of Gawain's terrible reign was a dream, and that when he took the belt off and handed it to the Grey Knight and said, "Now I'm ready." I don't know if it was my pietistic Christian morality that went, "Oh, good, hooray, Gawain, good job,"
right?
But I wonder if virtue is its own reward would be a better way to put that. Maybe that's the message there.
It just seems like the poem Gawain was written for a Christian world. And the failing of a Christian world is to put faith in one's own chivalry and virtue, right?
Yep.
Religion about pietism instead of Jesus.
Oh, I love that.
But this movie was so clearly made for a secular world. And I wonder if what it is trying to say is something particularly tuned to that in Gawain, the majority of the culture can identify with him because he's a perfect modern teenage boy at the opening of the film. And the fact that he has to navigate these questions of what is valuable in life and what should one do. Is it greatness? Is it honor that one should pursue, or is it goodness, like his girlfriend says? That might be a particular question to our time that wasn't as important to the poem.
That's fascinating. I love that. I can't wait to watch this.
So then to the question of the episode before we wrap up here, responsive art. Yes. Good. Do we like? Does this
Are those two
qualify
separate
as a
questions?
category of
Remind me what
faithful adaptation?
Emily, what do you mean by the term responsive then?
Well,
based on this conversation,
Ian is trying to say is essentially what this director has done is in full understanding, as far as we can tell, in full understanding of what the original poem was actually about, or at least in pretty good understanding. Maybe he doesn't entirely understand the Christian elements of it, but he has respect for and has studied this poem.
Absolutely.
And then takes it and does his own thing with it. That isn't what the poem did. I mean, on a very superficial level, he adds random scenes like these naked giants walking through a field.
Oh, I think that's actually in the original, isn't it?
It is not.
It's not?
No.
Oh,
It's
I
one-
thought it
heavens.
was.
We
It's
wouldn't
one-
probably teach
it's
it to our
one
junior
tiny-
hires.
It's one tiny fragment of one line in the original poem.
Yeah, it does show up
You
in
mean the
there. but
naked
he
women are 20 stories tall?
He just
He
kind of
mentions
elaborated
giants,
on it.
but he didn't say they were naked and women.
Yeah, all he
no,
does is
that's
say
interpretive
giants.
for sure.
Yeah.
It seems interpretive.
And just for the sake of fun, I think what it represents in the film is something like a primitive or essential humanity. Because what I noticed this time watching it for the second time is Gawain stands on the cliff and the knight everyone is the knight.
Everybody's a
all
knight.
characters are the knight. The giant reaches out and he says, "It would be so helpful to me if you would take me on my journey." He like calls out to this giant for help.
So you
and-
like 4 steps.
yeah, and so the giant reaches out and like assumably to help him, right? It looks like it's scary but nice looking, and he reaches out its hand and he cowers and runs away. He's too terrified of it. And then the fox that's traveling with him howls, and then the giant naked chorus takes up the howl, and there's like identification and like the wildness and the nature between the creature and these giants.
That sounds trippy, dude.
It's pretty weird. It really
It's
is pretty
trippy.
weird.
It's pretty
Yeah,
weird.
I think there's a lot of naturalism that
an element
verges
of
on
Rick and Morty,
nihilism
too.
in this movie.
Mm.
But
I think so too, and I think it definitely informed our time. But anyway, the fact that he cowers from the hand, it seems like also another representation of his struggle, right?
To find discourage.
Or to define himself, that
Mm.
he's too afraid of of whatever it is, the greatness of the world out there. But anyway, I don't know.
Wow.
So the whole idea of responsive art is that the individual, while knowing the story very well, creates a work of art that's in conversation with the original intentions of the author as he understands them to be, right? And changes things up, not because he really intended to do a faithful retelling of the story, but because he wants to emphasize particular things and ask particular questions that maybe confront the original story and counter it in some way.
well,
Or
I don't
what
know.
do you mean?
That's a good question, whether he's countering it or not. I think what Emily's arguing is that he's not countering the original story at all. He's turning with that story behind him and saying to his own viewers, who are you and me, in our era, this is the question that needs asking. And Gawain causes me to ask this question.
In the
So here
21st
it
century,
is.
as opposed
Right.
to the 9th century.
I see.
Exactly.
That is really cool.
And so it is a partnership of sorts between this director and the Pearl Poet.
Well, yeah,
Right.
if the poem is putting Christianity to the test, maybe the film is putting nihilism to the test by the same
Yeesh.
devices.
You might be
Mhm.
right. You might be right. That is so much smarter than my first read of that movie.
Well, and I just want to be clear, I'm not,
Everyone's smarter
I'm
than
not
me.
entirely convinced that his answer is no, nihilism isn't the answer. Like, I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean,
it's a
could
pretty,
go either way.
it could go either way, but I think that's kind of the point. It's a question.
Well, my own, I'll stick my oar in here for a second. My own initial response to this was that it fails as a reading of the original poem because it doesn't tell the whole story.
Right.
That doesn't mean it fails as its own work of art. I think it
Yeah.
was extraordinarily successful as its own work of art and really beautiful. It was the best film of the year,
Thought-provoking.
in my opinion, the year it came out.
Mm.
But if we're going to talk about it in comparison to the work that it's based on, we have to have a solid reading of the work that it's based on first. And it turns out it's really difficult to come up with. I mean, even careful readers who share the faith of the poet have a difficult time coming up with what I would consider to be a nuanced reading
Which
of the
is
poem.
like, maybe also that's part of the point of the poem, that you're going to struggle
Mhm.
with it and you're probably going to read it wrong. And like, that just makes me wonder if that's true of the film as well. Like, maybe a nihilist comes to this film and goes, yeah, that's totally right. But that other answer is like lying in the background for those who would see it, you know?
You calling me short? Well, I love it. I mean, I think it's. I think you are brilliant, and I think the film is brilliant, and I think all of us that have seen it, Megan excluded, would highly recommend that Megan see it.
Yes, I think
Nice,
so.
I
Yeah,
will.
yeah, definitely.
Wouldn't you guys recommend it? I mean, what?
Yeah, especially after this
Well,
conversation.
yeah, it's very
Absolutely.
thought-provoking and deep, and you know, it's not one that I just throw on because I've been working hard all day long and I
Ironing
just want
some
to check
shorts
my
on- yeah.
brain at the door.
Right.
But you know, it's a
It's
really
no Miranda.
thought-provoking, artistic movie, and I think it's worth having a conversation
Yeah.
about.
Agreed.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, I
that's
will
cool.
do my homework. I've been duly chastened.
It also looked really good on the screen in our house because the
Oh.
color palette is my favorite color palette and is
Oh.
the palette that I decorate in. So I was watching
So it
it
looks
and
great in your
thinking,
living
I
room.
was like, wow, this movie goes really well in my
Yeah.
living
If
room.
we were ever going to host some sort of upscale dinner party where it was useful to have something going in the background with no sound, that's the movie to do.
You'd
baby.
put on
Hey,
Hey,
these
what,
hors
giant
d'oeuvres
women?
are great, Emily. What about the naked women on the wall?
Yeah, what's going on?
What's with that
Is that
giant
talking
They're
naked
not
person?
like, just to be clear, they're not like realistic naked women.
Oh, they're
no.
not sexual.
They look like
in any
androids.
way.
They look like
Yeah,
giant
they
androids.
totally look like androids.
But
Very
What a strange
tall.
flex.
I
Yeah.
just wonder if we could have a little conversation here at the end about art house films and how you guys feel about them, because a lot of people I think would dismiss, and like a lot of the secular response to this film that wasn't engaging with it on a Christian basis basically were like, this is too weird for us.
This movie's really strange.
So what is this kind of art house technique? Is it too pretentious, or is there a place for it?
Yeah, I'm
I
glad you
think
asked
there's
that.
totally a place for it.
Absolutely.
I really think the art house film does actually appeal to an individual who's going to the movies with their brain turned on purpose.
Yes.
And
I
that
think
is very
so, too.
different than going to the movies to be entertained.
Absolutely.
And
I
I
agree.
think that's important. It basically it draws the art form into a serious arena.
Mm.
It's art.
Sure.
Megan,
Right?
it sounded like you were going to push back.
I am. I do think it needs to be said out loud also that if we're doing the whole book to movie conversation, going to an art house film is a little bit like reading E.E. Cummings. You go because of the way that it makes you feel that you've gone. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
There is an element of that. And I think that someone on the CenterForLit staff needs to say that out loud. And if
You're just
cool
saying
with
it's
that-
all pretentious.
well, yes, there is an element of pretension
Harriet.
that goes into being an academic as well, to
Harriet.
caring about books, you know? So I don't know. You need to be self-aware when you
It's
go
only
to the movies.
pretentious if you're putting it on and you don't really
No.
enjoy it.
Well, I
That's
think
not true.
I think
There's an element of pretension to
That's
reading an
true.
E.E.
I
Cummings
I don't know
book.
if I agree with you about that.
that's true of people who watch the movies, but I think it can also be true of directors too. I
Yes.
think that
Yes.
directors can use the art house thing in inappropriate and unnecessary ways.
Absolutely.
would-
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, there's people that are weird.
Yeah. But it's not just
Some of them are
weirdness,
movie
though.
directors.
Thank you for
I'll
that.
back Emily on this one. It's not just weirdness. It's also there's a fine line when it comes to works of art. We've had this conversation in other contexts for years and years now on this show. There's a fine line between obscurity that's artistic, that draws the viewer into contemplation and makes them ask difficult questions and causes the kind of joy that comes as a reader from doing something hard with your brain,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
obscurity for obscurity's sake.
Yeah.
Right.
That gives you a lens through which to look at the author and see them as some sort of higher order being of mysterious
I
genius,
would
right?
say that this year's Oscar nominee, The Power of the Dog, absolutely fits into that second category. It was there's no
Mhm.
substance, but it was just trying to be pretentious.
The goal of it was
Yeah.
to say something pretentiously. So,
Mm.
but I don't think that all art house movies do that. And what I'll say
No,
is,
I don't
as
either.
as I said a minute ago, a resident cinephile, is that I think the art house movie takes really, really seriously the craft. It's not just a vehicle for telling a story. It's actually a set of brushes to paint with, or a set
Mhm.
of chisels to sculpt with. Film has dimensions that other works of art don't. And so an art house director is usually in it for the craft, and the story is sometimes kind of a byproduct because the
Yeah.
craft is the point. He's
Well,
handing you
Well,
a
he's chosen a
painting.
genre, right?
Well, yeah, he's
it's a
handing you
genre.
a painting as much as he's handing you a
Right.
novel.
Which is
With-
really fun.
I think the two come together really well in The Green Knight, though, because the content actually does lend itself really well to the style. Like, can you imagine?
dude.
Can you imagine trying to adapt this movie in a popular format? It would turn into a cartoon, basically.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's so
It
funny
would
that you
be-
bring that up. Oh, go ahead, Dad.
I was just going to make a reference to Angelina Jolie's Beowulf,
Yes!
but we don't have to do
Yeah.
that.
I was hoping that would come in at least once.
That is so great. I'm glad you brought that up because it's possible for people who are devotees of film as an art form to get it wrong because they don't know from story.
Mhm.
And I was recently doing some research for a summer course that I'm going to offer and came across Roger Ebert's reviews of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings trilogy. And he panned them.
What?
And he panned them because what is the quote? He said, this is a loose paraphrase. He said, if Tolkien's story is about hobbits on a quest, bringing along some wizards and some men and some elves for the ride, Peter Jackson's trilogy is about wizards and men going on a quest and bringing along some hobbits.
Oh, buddy.
And he reads the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and he says this is about whimsy. This is about a childlike view of the world. And Peter Jackson just decided to make it a drama-heavy action movie.
Oh, man. He wrecked it.
So he didn't read it right in the first place, Ebert.
He missed it, yeah. And then all of the things that he says about filmmaking are full of praise for Peter Jackson's vision. He
Right.
basically says, listen, the fact that this is a terrible reading of the Tolkien books doesn't change the fact that these are great movies. By the time he gets to The Return of the King, he says, richly deserved all 11 of its Oscars. This is a
So-
cinematic genius.
So he also could have said, if he had been a better reader, it's a great adaptation
And
too.
also, it's one of the
Exactly.
greatest adaptations of all time.
I bring it up to say, even the great ones get it wrong. Roger Ebert, rest in peace, one of the best prose stylists and movie critics ever. But we're dealing with two different art forms here. And I think that's why this conversation is so fun, right? We're talking about literature and story and how to be a good storyteller and a story reader. And we're talking about painting on the screen and how to be
Interesting.
a good painter and a good understander and appreciator of painting.
And you have to be able to move between those two things, I think, to read films well. To
Yeah.
read an art house film, you have to give yourself to the art house film, but if you carry that same attitude into our next subject on the table, Kenneth Branagh, then you're gonna get him all wrong. And
Yeah, that's
yeah.
a good point. He's not
That's-
exactly our next one. It's two down the road.
oh no, that's sad. Well,
We can
looking
wait. It's
forward
worth
to that
it.
Well, you guys, you are all brilliant as usual. And you listeners, thank you so much for joining us. You are brilliant too. And we hope that you have enjoyed these episodes as much as we have enjoyed recording them. Do please contact us on all your various social media outlets and tell your friends about the show. And we will see you next time for another episode of BiblioFiles. Happy reading.
Happy reading,
Happy
everybody.
reading.